Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Danehy. I'm the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and a Master Lecturer of the Department of Mass Communication, Advertising, and Public Relations here at Boston University's College of Communication. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to today's discussion, how AI is changing the media industry. So today's event is part of our series of virtual events we call COMtalks, featuring topics and experts in advertising, film, journalism, and media science, public relations, and television. Our conversation today will be recorded and it's available to watch later online on the COM website and on the YouTube channel, and you can share the link as well. So today's conversation will explore a topic everybody's talking about, artificial intelligence and generative AI specifically, but its impact on the media industry and the people who power it has yet to be fully understood. Will it bring new prosperity or economic ruin? Will it take us to new creative heights or to bland minimum standards? Our Boston University panel of experts will explore the impact of AI on the fields of film, video games, and interactive media, advertising, and journalism in this timely online discussion. So now I'm going to take a moment to introduce you to our panel of experts, and thank you all for agreeing to participate in this. I feel very fortunate to be a part of this webinar. So Sejin Paik is a PhD candidate in emerging media studies at Boston University's College of Communication. Sejin's research interests lie at the intersection of media and democracy, AI-mediated communication, and human-computer interaction. Her current research focuses on the ethics of AI and automation in journalism, algorithmic curation effects on news trust, and in the design of human-centered AI systems. She is a recipient of the Toe Knight News Innovation Fellowship from Columbia University and contributed to National Science Foundation-funded projects on online misinformation and media bias detection. Previously, Sejin worked at Google News and received her master's at Stanford University. Chris Lee is a senior lecturer of advertising here at COM. He joined us this year as a multiple hat-wearing executive creative director and writer at top Boston-based shops like Mullen and Hill Holiday. He brings more than 25 years of experience developing brand strategy and omni-channel content development programs in industries ranging from semiconductors and enterprise software to local supermarkets and pro sports teams, including the Boston Bruins and the Boston Celtics. His most recent campaign for the Bruins won 2 bowls at this year's Hot Shell award show. And Margaret Wallace is an associate professor of the practice, focusing on the innovation-focused Media Ventures program, where she teaches classes on entrepreneurship, interactive media, and video games. Margaret comes to COM as a tech executive and a creator of video games, apps, and other interactive experiences that span a variety of industry sectors and platforms, including interactive entertainment, mobile games, health tech, education, impact, and experiential tech. I'd also like to note that Margaret received her undergraduate degree right here at COM. So before we dive in, a word about our format. I'm going to plan to get the ball rolling with some questions, but around 3:45 mark, we'll pose questions suggested by all of you. So you may submit questions at any time during our time together via the question and answer tab. And apologies if we might not be able to get to all of the questions, but I will do my best to get to as many as we can. So let's get started because we have a lot to talk about. So I'm going to pose the same question to each of you to help set the scene. How is artificial intelligence currently being used in your fields? So we'll start with Margaret. Margaret, you're in the film and TV department and teach video games and interactive media. It includes interactive media and media innovation. What are you seeing in the field?
Thank you. That's a great question. And hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I'll start to answer this question from the perspective of having worked in the video games industry for much of my career. And the reason I'm focusing on video games is I like to tell my students and just about anyone who cares to listen that the video games industry is always on the leading edge of innovation. Innovation in terms of technology advancements, innovation in terms of the whole human-computer interactive experiences that are explored. And games essentially provide a fertile ground for exploring all sorts of social interactions and simulations of real life scenarios and situations. So the games industry has, like many other industry sectors, has used artificial intelligence honestly for decades. So even if you're playing a simple game of tic-tac-toe, for example, and you're playing against a computer opponent, that computer opponent needs to be able to calculate all the moves possible. So that's an early example of ways in which artificial intelligence has been used throughout. Now, fast forward to 2023, and we're seeing the use of artificial intelligence and generative AI used not only in terms of optimizing production pipelines, we're also seeing it impact how games are made and also how games are experienced, whether you're talking about interacting with what we call NPCs, non-player characters. We're increasingly seeing instances where when a person is interacting with a digital character, that they're increasingly being driven by these generative AI models that can understand language and that are also much more adaptive in terms of allowing players to not only explore different kinds of gameplay, but also in terms of narrative and storytelling. Another final area I'm seeing huge inroads being made as far as generative AI go is the use of these tools for community moderation and making sure there's a healthy player climate, and also in terms of acting as an assistant in terms of helping facilitate gameplay. So it's like a user agent. So those are just some of the areas I'm seeing just huge advancements in the past year.
Great, fascinating, a lot of changes. And Chris, what do you see in the advertising world?
Well, similarly, I mean, in advertising, it's automating everything from research and strategy to writing, editing, animation, analytics, optimization. I mean, even yes, idea generation. Doesn't mean all the ideas are good, and we'll talk about that. But in some ways, I mean, I feel like at the highest level, it's really democratized like the creative development process, meaning like I'm a conceptual writer, have been for my entire career. Now, beginning of my career, I didn't know how to use the Adobe suite, right? That was the domain of art directors and designers. But now, you know, I'm not saying that I can take all of my ideas to that level of polish to some of my awesome, you know, colleagues, but I can get it pretty far, and I can get it far enough to sell in ideas, right? So I think the big thing, you know, from an advertising standpoint is how quickly, you know, as I call it a development tool, you know, how quickly we can go from idea to execution, right? So more quickly than ever before. So and that's kind of how I preach it in my classes here, you know, at BU. But it's important to remember that it is not a replacement for human creativity, not a replacement for human judgment. We still need humans on both ends of it, and I'm sure we'll talk, you know, more about that. So I like to think of it less of as an idea generator and more of a co-collaborator, right? Where you might have some initial ideas that you want to, you know, plug in and see what comes out. But it's not, you know, I could tell you, you know, any of my, you know, writers, we can plug in certain prompts, and you'll see there's the danger of that sameness, right? And we'll talk more about the negative things. You have to really curate your inputs and put smarter things into the upfront to get better output, right? It's kind of an obvious kind of thing there, but Yeah, so I use it in class. I allow the students to use it, but I don't allow them to rely on it.
Mhm.
So I guess I can give a quick example from my own practice too, just
Yes.
real world example. Been working with this a nonprofit company or nonprofit organization that connects college students with older, lower income adults in the Boston area, and they do things like creative activities and IT support and things like that. And we had this idea of, and their main brand asset color is purple, right? So we had this idea of weaving this beautiful ribbon through inner city neighborhoods, combined with messaging. And years ago, that to show that as a storyboard for a video, would have I'd immediately have to hire an illustrator, or but immediately the way that I described it and put it into Dali at the time was one of the art programs. Again, it got me far enough to be able to show it as keyframes along with my scripts, and it allowed me to sell the idea in that way a lot more quickly than I would have been able to develop that without that tool. So just one sort of real world example, the small one, of how I've been using it in my own practice, not as a replacement of what ideas, but an augment, a collaborator, a way to augment, way to find some inspiration, but not rely on that output as being finished.
Great. Do you think that a lot of ad agencies are using generative AI when they're pitching clients for new projects?
I think absolutely. I think the agencies are figuring, like everybody else. It's a moving train, and it's moving really fast, and figuring out how to use it to the best advantage. But it doesn't replace the storytelling, right? It doesn't replace the ability to diagnose a business problem and know how to and know what to do with that, right? And so I feel like that's you have to know what you're asking to get more intelligent outputs, right?
Right.
But absolutely, agencies are looking at it, and we'll talk about some of the effects of that. I don't want to steal any time away.
Great. Thank you so much. Fascinating. Sejin, how is generative AI being used in journalism?
Hello, everybody, and also thank you for having me. I think Margaret and Chris actually said everything that a lot of things that I was going to say, but it's just more in terms of like I'm going to talk about it in journalism again. And I think of journalism's news editorial work, divided into 4 areas of news gathering, production, distribution, and business analytics. I think when we talk specifically about generative AI, which is any kind of multimodal text, audio, video generation, it truly is in some ways revolutionizing how journalists are going to gather news and also produce it. Things like news distribution we've been used in journalism. Professionals have been using different types of AI for distribution, but again, for generative AI, where it's really hitting the journalism industry, not in necessarily like a negative way, but just in various ways, positive and negative, is in the content creation side. And it's very, my take on this also is very similar to Chris, where it's very good for people who are at a certain level of expertise in order to use it as a collaborative tool, as a way to brainstorm, but where it becomes more on the full automated dependency side, that's something to be worried about that we will get into. But yeah, those are the areas in journalism.
Great. Thank you so much. So let's start with the upside. So what are potential opportunities? What potential opportunities does AI present for creative content in, film, digital media, tech, video gaming, and advertising industries? And let's start with Chris on that question.
Yeah, I guess I can just get a little bit more, specific here with regard to, what it actually can do, right? For folks that it generates headlines. It can write articles, design visual content, even create, entire videos. And when you start to get into some of the augmented reality, extending those worlds, combining easily, combining graphics for those type of experiences. But here again, I mean, and it can also, obviously, the other big opportunity here is optimizing, content from an analytics standpoint, right? So it can diagnose, massive amounts of and synthesize massive amounts of customer data, behavioral preferences, consumption and patterns, which has a good and a bad side, but it allows creators to really personalize content to specific individuals or groups, very, 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 very easily. So like targeting and segmentation. So on one level, that's giving folks more relevant information, but but then that can get into the land of intrusiveness and privacy that I guess we'll talk to on the downside.
Great. And let's go to Margaret.
Sure thing. So, gosh, where does one even begin to really adequately cover what the upside is to having these tools available? One thing that I, as somebody who's worked in the interactive entertainment world for much of my career, and I'm not necessarily a coder, a programmer. I can hack my way through different things. But something that I really try to reinforce with my students, and again, anyone who will listen, is to leverage these tools to start becoming comfortable and familiar, not only with the idea of machine learning, but also with the idea of utilizing these tools for learning how to code. So coding your own interactive media pieces. When I want to make a game, I need to hire at least one programmer, usually several, depending on the size of the project. I need to hire, folks who are experts in database structure, artists, and all of that. And while I'm not saying that these tools suddenly negate the need for these teams, and I also fundamentally believe in the creative industries, the more diverse your team is, the often, almost always, the better the output. And it's not always good to kind of work in a vacuum. However, having these tools available, even just the other week, I wanted to make a WordPress theme for a very simple website. I couldn't find any off-the-shelf options that were kind of what I was looking for. I spent less than an hour in ChatGPT 4 and I created an entire WordPress theme. So I think having a level of competency with coding is one of the many upsides. And then, of course, improving the time for independent creators, independent game developers, interactive media makers. There was a time where certain kinds of games or interactive experiences were a little bit not achievable because of lack of time, money, resources, staff. But now I feel that these tools have the potential to democratize creativity, the creative process. And I think everyone who has access to these tools really ought to use it, not only for generating concepts, ideas, thinking how to improve workflows, automate workflows where it makes sense, but to become comfortable with kind of like the nuts and bolts around how these tools work, can work to let you be good at Unreal Engine or Unity, which is one of the tools we use to make games, or Python code for manipulating data, creating data visualizations. So I feel the upside. I'm also talking about this in light of the fact that the games industry is going through unprecedented disruption right now. It always is on some level, but there have been over 6,000 layoffs in the industry this year alone. And we can certainly point to the promise and perils of AI as one contributing factor for this phenomenon. So on the one hand, that's really difficult to face those challenges. But on the other hand, I think you're going to see a lot more game companies that are starting new businesses, new kinds of studios, new kinds of tools, technology platforms, entertainment and experiential platforms that are more fully embracing these technologies, ideally to generate content that's entertaining more quickly and without having that high overhead.
Wow, so that's really interesting. That's really interesting because one thing is that people are concerned about being replaced, humans being replaced. And it's an interesting perspective that it's not really necessarily replacing humans, but it's creating more content. It's creating more opportunities to create more content.
It will definitely disrupt a lot of jobs in the near term, especially jobs that are more sort of repetitive. And it is challenging because you want everyone to have the basic foundation around, creating, producing, making games, design. So it's a mixed bag, but I think we have no choice. The Pandora is out of the box is open. And I think we have to try to embrace it as much as we can and use it to our own advantage as much as we can.
But do you see it? Do you see it leading to more content being produced more quickly?
Absolutely. I'm already seeing that happen right now, and new kinds of content, new kinds of storytelling, personalized content on levels that we've never seen before, down to the person, the individual. In my class, we're talking about the metaverse today, my interactive media class, and we're talking a lot about the use of digital twins and virtual humans in these various scenarios that have full capabilities to, this is very blue ocean, blue sky, but like capabilities to interact and to impart new kinds of storytelling experiences and interactive experiences. So it's a mixed bag for sure, but I don't see it stopping.
Great. That's fascinating. Sejin, how about journalism? What are the opportunities for journalism, and is it improving, or does it have the ability to improve journalism?
Yeah, I think in journalism, the parts that I focus on in terms of where AI will improve is in terms of the different organizations that it's going to push up and democratize. So specifically like local news ecosystems, I think that's a very interesting and high potential area that AI can actually help and quote unquote, again, improve in some way. If we think about local newsrooms as well, I've talked to so many local newsroom professionals right before this year, before chat and generative AI technology came out. And a lot of their struggles was they don't have human capacity to generate like basic social media posts for different platforms. And, hiring one person costs a lot. And so now with generative AI platforms we have today, it is pretty easy to take a really well-written news article and ask it to generate different types of social media posts on different types of social media platforms. Things like that will really, I think, help smaller newsrooms that are struggling with, costs to pay for, full-on social media employees. However, again, exactly to what Margaret said, and something I also see a huge struggle with is the other side. You need foundations in journalism that are core to just how do you report? How do you tell a good story? What does it mean to balance objectivity while having a creative sense to let it resonate, let the story resonate? Things like that are like maybe students are not being either taught it or they're not incentivized to learn those things, and they go straight to the flashy tech side of things. So that layer of foundational journalism standards and education is kind of getting hollowed out. And so that is a little worrisome in terms of who is going to, in our future generations, understand what is good copywriting, and editing, and all of those kind of skill sets. But yeah, I do want to highlight areas for local, regional, even freelance journalists to take on, use this tool with the right, ethical standards in place. Yeah.
But it's
Sejin, if
one
I-
thing you said is like being able to promote it more through social media and being able to have the news go that way. Do you think that that contributes to the democratization of news, getting news into more accessible or more readily easy to find? Or
Yeah, I do think so. And then, I mean, I was going to touch on this on the negative side, but quickly, because it does touch on this part. It gets complicated though, because I think a lot of newsrooms right now are seeing that there's not a lot of traction with their audiences on these different social media platforms like X and Facebook. So they're pulling out of these platform efforts. But the thing is, younger generations are getting their news on these platforms. So again, there's this gap being created where newsrooms are not putting effort into where younger generations are getting the news, while their metrics are showing that no one is engaging with them. So more things to think about, and to try to, lessen that gap. Yeah.
Interesting. So I'm going to talk about the ways that AI, one thing I want to ask that you started to mention was about AI contributing to personalized content experience for audiences. And Sejin, I'm going to follow up with what you were talking about, because I think it's really pertinent. So many news outlets are online and they're very sensitive to site traffic, clicks, and that powerful algorithm that drives what people see and don't see. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess to that question, I do want to talk a lot about the algorithmic curation side of things. That's actually not, I mean, it's more, apparent in social media and search engines. And obviously, curation efforts are also like technically, from an AI technical sense, that is like an advanced level of it in generative AI. But things that we still need to put our focus and attention on is algorithmic curation of information in social, like in places like social media, where we're getting information in a very heterogeneous environment. So mixtures of content, not just siloed into, I am going to NewYorkTimes.com to get my news. Now it's a lot of people are getting their information with disparate content just ranked on top of each other, with context completely flown away. So I think those are things that I think like this year, particularly with Gen AI, we forgot that there are still issues with algorithmic curation, and the power of algorithms dictating the way that we see, and like that, algorithms populate the types of content. I also want to make note that although I say that there's a lot of, control by algorithms, these algorithms are still created by humans. Behind them are all these humans making the decisions. So I think the emphasis is on really continuing from a research side and from our expertise as a whole to keep pushing on research that shows how algorithmic curation is impacting all of our three fields, and really demanding more transparency and control from each of our fields as well, to place more like input in how it gets curated and how it benefits these individual and also somewhat interlinked media domains.
Great. Chris, can you tell us some ways that AI contributes to personalized content experiences for audiences and advertising?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think just from a massive targeting standpoint, right? When you think of how quickly we can analyze, content creators can identify patterns, trends, correlations that just, are challenging for the average human to discern on such a vast and fast scale. I mean, I think we're all impressed, with just how quickly, that you get the answers. And when we say answers, it's not always the end answer, right? Like it could just be the starting point, but it gets you it gives you a very good start in all of those areas. And I think, and maybe this is the segue over to the negative, but then it starts to lean on those privacy issues, right? And accuracy too. Like sometimes, and I guess, Sejin could probably speak more to this, from a technical standpoint, but when AI doesn't know the answer, right, quote unquote answer, it fills it in, right? It doesn't leave blank. So it draws something from somewhere that likely may or may not be the truth or accurate. So there's still that level of, human judgment on the other end that still needs to be, considered carefully.
You mentioned something about privacy, and it's like, I know a lot of
Yeah.
people are really worried about this personalized, that we already have personalized content creation, that we have such an ability to personalize it, now it's getting to be even more so. So what, so how can organizations balance the use of AI with privacy considerations? And is that something that needs to be really valued?
Absolutely. I mean, I guess I'll just jump in real quick on that. Is that, all companies, academic institutions, they need an AI policy, right? That there needs to be a strategy for it. What is okay, what isn't okay, and be transparent about what that playbook is. Because it is opening up, a lot of ethical considerations that require multifaceted thinking, right? There's a lot of technical considerations, right? There's just how clear you communicate with your users about the data and usage and the content. Like, I think every time you use ChatGPT, there's sort of like another sort of caveat that comes in when you open it up, right? Of some sort of, new rule or new insight that they just want to make you aware of, which is great, right? That at least it that transparency of knowing sort of, what to expect and what you're getting into. And then also knowing that there needs to be like a higher level of scrutiny with the systems to identify, and rectify, biases or unintended consequences, obviously. Oh, and even like I think somebody mentioned the language diversity, right? So right now and I think some of the different platforms address that themselves, but just in general, some of the major ones are much more of the, more commonly spoken languages, So in any case, there's like in everything else, there's an inherent biases that I think that just, we can't all just take the information that comes back for granted.
Okay, good, thank you. So Margaret, you had mentioned this too about AI contributing to personalized content experience for audiences. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And again, are there issues with privacy that you see?
Well, so thank you for that. And I'm just going to back up really quickly. So, to kind of establish, why are we here now versus not talking about this 5 or 10 years ago in quite the same way. And what we're seeing is a massive convergence across all media industries and other industries as well. And we're seeing, as has already been pointed out, the rise of algorithms. I always like to tell people that I speak with, if you think about all the ways in which algorithms are impacting your day-to-day life in ways that may not even seem obvious. So algorithms, there's an abundance of data. We're dealing with more data now than we ever have in the history of humanity. We are also seeing massive advances in computing power and also data storage and manipulation and serving up of data, also enabled by advancements in Wi-Fi technology. So all of this taken together is what brought us in part to the current situation we're in today. And I like to say that tech really, obviously, you hear that idea that tech is neutral, and how it's leveraged is sort of holding up a mirror to society and who we are, whether it's leveraged for good, bad, or neutral purposes. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. And then in terms of personalization, I mean, in a lot of ways, so for example, very practical examples, if you're playing a game, and I keep losing a certain level, there's a tool that we've been using in the games world for decades. It's called dynamic difficulty adjustment. It's a type of AI procedure that will tailor the game somewhat based on how well or poorly a player is doing. Because again, games are so concerned with the moment-to-moment interaction that if you lose somebody, you lose them for good. So tailoring the user experience is certainly one way. Another practical way in which we're seeing it used is with player matching. So if I want to join a team or I want to play a game of bowling against somebody online, and I'm a beginning player, they're not necessarily going to match me with somebody who is like a world champion player. They'll try to create a better match to make a more even player experience. AI is used for segmenting audiences according to all sorts of metrics, whether it's affinity groups or, like I said, player style. You could be playing a game that is a location-based game where you have to like walk to different places to like check in or what have you, and AI might help analyze and predict your player behavior based on your walking style, for example. So there are a million ways to slice and dice that kind of use of AI. Other customized experiences, again, having game worlds that are generated based on your preferences, maybe based on your region even. So it's honestly, there's so many ways that AI can personalize and customize the experience. And then obviously on the social networks, the way the algorithms not only serve up content and serve up related content to users. That's one area that is potentially problematic because it's often creating these silos, these echo chamber silos. And then finally, I would also say, in general, again, back to the creativity. AI is going to create a situation where people are much more able to put their own creative works out there in the world, in terms of giving them the tools that they might need to create something.
Great. Sejin, can you tell me a little bit about personalization in journalism and content creation?
Yeah, so when I think about generative AI's role in personalization of journalism, it's something that I'm thinking about in my research agenda currently, tying it to really the human and computer interaction side of things, where a lot of the generative AI technology we're seeing today from a user side shows up as a chatbot interface. So it's a real-time interaction, and users are right now siloed in on their own screens, and they ask the chatbot like Chat or Bard or Bing. They ask it with some maybe subconscious understanding that it's another agent or another almost like being on the other side. And as you ask it, a news consumer might ask, "What is the news of today?" And the way that you kind of conceptualize what you are interacting with is so different from the pre-generative AI technologies, where you are still, as a news consumer, going to a search engine or going to a social media platform, and all those peripheral contents and contextual cues, visually and content-wise, still give you that sense of agency and understanding that there are things around you, that you can parse out information through your own will. However, I am very curious to see in the chatbot generative AI interface, where you are a little more privatized in this room sense, as I always think of it. How will that change our understanding of news sources? I think existing legacy, or not even legacy, but any kind of news organizations, their credibility with their audiences might change. It might go even further back, as Chris said too, in terms of how we're going to see information cited. It might really fall more backward, like into
You're saying that people might see news as being less credible and less trustworthy?
Or they might start to not directly connect credibility to New York Times or CNN, they
Mm.
might direct it towards the chatbot interface that they are interacting with, depending on how these technology platforms design the way that they show these citations, or like where the sources come from. So I think that's something to really think about from the newsroom side, and as well as, again, for us to push for these tech platforms to recognize content creators and journalists is importantly.
Yeah. So you said in your research, you say that newsrooms need to revisit ethical standards. Why and how so?
I think it's exactly this example that I, brought up. And I think understanding the agency changes that are happening, like truly thinking about what is the relationship between a journalist interacting with certain types of AI systems. And now, like, as we're saying, there's so many different types of AI. Now we're entering more of like the semi-autonomous, even autonomous types of AI forms that can just generate for you, distribute autonomously for you. So when we get to that particular area, we don't really have ethical standards that really pick at who is accountable for that. And I think that's going to depend on different newsrooms and their different standards. More on a more idealistic sense, like maybe there's a board of, and like, let's take for like the US, for example, maybe there's like a UN type of like board of journalists from different newsrooms coming together and setting some more higher level standards and letting that trickle down into, kind of like state level or like newsroom level wide guidelines. But again, I really thinking through what does it mean to set accountability and responsibility to the newsrooms who use the tool, or is it going to be an accountability responsibility issue on the tech platforms themselves? A question to be had, to be discussed, I think, for sure.
Fascinating. So considering the bias in AI algorithms, so how can these media industries address the concerns related to fairness, diversity, and representation in AI-driven content creation? And let's start with Chris for that question.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one?
Sure. So there's potential for bias in AI algorithms.
Yeah.
So how can advertising address concerns related to fairness, diversity, and representation in AI-driven content creation?
I mean, I think, again, it just comes back to, it kind of comes back to just not accepting the outputs as necessarily the right thing. In simplistic terms, right?
Yeah.
I think you have to fact check, you have to still check multiple sources, do your own research. I mean, research is a huge part, obviously, of content creation and brand advertising and things, but it's not enough just to use ChatGPT for research, right? There's different inputs that you can get. So I think that's the key, like in anything else, is considering multiple inputs, and doing, though AI is again, can just synthesize massive amounts of data, but there still has to be that human element that's connecting the dots. And I feel like the stronger use, again, is the better you are at connecting the dots on the upfront in terms of like how things are related, the better that the output is going to be when on the other side, right? Because you already have a point of view, you already have drawn, so you're not just being complacent and relying on the machine, if you will, to provide the right answer.
Great, thank you. Margaret, what would you say for gaming industry and films?
So, I mean, my gosh, it's a really complicated topic that is further made more complicated by the amazing strides that OpenAI has done and has achieved in the last year. For example, I am so surprised to see a company like Google on the defensive, right? Really trying to catch up, right? So, and what that tells me is I have a heightened concern around the safety protocols and the ethical protocols that are in place around these large tech companies that, let's face it, they own the space right now. And so some of the ways in which this could be addressed, one, we've already touched on it already, is the idea of ensuring that the data sets are representative. And I mean, I'll tell you, one of the most frustrating generative AI experiences I have is using Midjourney. I even pay for the premium subscription, and it's so clear to me that the data sets that are available in Midjourney are just completely not taking these ideas, or if they're taking it into account, they're not successful in terms of diversity and inclusivity, in terms of, I feel, the data sets and the results that are generated. There needs to be an awareness and inclusivity that so far has not been really fully achieved on these AI development teams. Again, diverse groups make better choices. And I think a lot of these teams, I like to say, we like to think the technology sector is a meritocracy, but sometimes it's a meritocracy. And I think that's a huge problem. There is, as has already been pointed out, a lack of transparency in terms of the AI, and even in some cases, the AI researchers themselves aren't fully aware of how the results are generated. But there needs to be more transparency to the consumers at large, additional auditing and accountability, and then I would say a move towards greater regulations and standardization. I'm not optimistic this is going to happen in to keep pace with the advancements that we're seeing. And you can even see with the recent disruption at OpenAI, that was certainly part of what was going on there with the temporary ousting of Sam Altman from the organization. So it's really a challenge at how these models are trained. I think there's a really interesting company called Anthropic. We always talk about OpenAI, but I think Anthropic is one of those companies that's trying to address concerns around at the ethical dimensions of AI, the data set, the training. However, if you look at some of their recent investments they've taken in from some of the same names we're talking about, I have to wonder how successful they'll be in the long run maintaining that higher level of ethical stance and approach.
Great,
I mean,
thank you.
and again, if I
So
could
we
jump in there.
are, oh, sorry, go, Chris.
I was just going to say, I mean, just really quick, sorry, it's just like, it's like, how do we as a society cultivate a conscience, around this capability? I mean, I think that's the thing. And, it does take an open dialogue with technologists, content creators, policymakers, and the public. And I think the danger is that things are moving so fast that are those important conversations happening? Yeah.
That's a great point. That's a really great point. I tell you, this time is just flying by, and I could talk to all of you forever, and I'm not getting through all of the questions. So I'm going to turn over to our questions that we have some questions that have come through, and I'm just going to pose them and you can all answer them. Whoever wants to answer can answer. One question is that even though it was said that AI wasn't taking over human ingenuity and creativity, AI is stealing and synthesizing the creative output of humans and presenting it as original. How can artists, authors, writers, journalists, filmmakers, etc., protect their materials?
Really good question. You need a really good lawyer.
Well, I mean, on the one hand, don't post your stuff online so that it can be scraped by these tools. And I know we are seeing lawsuits come up around protecting copyright. And I know even with the recent SAG-AFTRA strike, that there were some terms, not great terms, to be totally honest, that were achieved around actors and their digital twins and how that would be leveraged. So I mean, I think it's a matter. It's not going to. It's a sprint. It's not a sprint, but it's a marathon, and it's just going to be a constant vigilance from all of these creators. However, I'm not that hopeful for the long term.
Great, thank you. And another question was, this is probably for Sejin, is will AI be able to account for and differentiate between straight journalism and biased journalism that we see on certain networks?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Differentiate between straight and biased journalism. I mean, when I hear that, I mean, my mind jumps to, factual, truthful, journalistic work. And I mean, when chat, for example, first came out, all the talk was about AI quote unquote hallucinating, basically saying infactual or producing infactual things. And now, I mean, I guess a few months ago, they were able to integrate a lot of their search queries with Bing and like other places. And so now they can actually cite sources. So that alleviates a little bit of the hallucination issue. Again, I think this is also a deeper layer of like trust built, like journalism really stands on trust building with journalists and news organizations. Now, as these AI platforms almost replace that role or mediate that trust role, even just the understanding of what is straight journalism versus what is biased. I think that is, again, I mean, that's a question I also ask, but it's going to have to do a lot with like a lot of formatting's changed already with news production, outlines and bullet points, which are what we see with these Gen AI platforms. And so like when you see something like when a news consumer sees something like that, are they going to take that more as straight journalism versus something that's like a fully top-down written story in an article? I'm not sure.
Yeah, like there are some organizations that gather data, and I think it's All Sides that does the ratings of the trust rating, and whether it leans left, right, or centered, and then the accuracy of what they're reporting. There's a rating for that as well, and that must take so much time to gather all that information. Do you think that that's something that AI is going to be able to do?
I think it'll do it. I think it's again more
Or
on
accurately.
right. And even if it does do it accurately, how much of these chatbots are going to also agentically place themselves in what they want? Like, if I ask a question about what is going on with the Israeli-Hamas conflict, what it decides to show me and the different types of sources and the types of sources and different contents and from different perspectives, there's a little bit of agency that's placed on the other side. And what they decide to show us is like, I mean, we're not really sure how that's being, engineered on the other side. And if they're going to force diversity on us, diversity of information, or is it just going to keep feeding what we want to see in our kind of siloed perspectives?
Yeah, fascinating. Wow. Another question is, can AI create humorous content? Can it have its own voice, or a voice that you want it to have?
Absolutely. I mean, well, I've never really asked it to like create something funny, right? Like, but I put funny things into it to see what I think is humorous. But certainly there's definitely, writing programs that do different tones, even voice recording, like where I could record my voice and then give it several different dialects, or or things like that. Like, but there's I've never asked it to be funny, but I've asked it to execute funny things. Like as an example, like I've always I'm not very good manually as an illustrator, right? But I have some ideas for cartoons, so so then I can put in what I ask for in the style. So it might be like, Far Side kind of style, or a combination between Far Side and sci-fi, or so you give it the more prompts, like if you know what you're looking for, right, then the again, you can get there. But I don't know, just like overtly asking it to be funny. I think you have to be more specific, in my opinion. I don't know if folks disagree with that.
How about in the world of creating video games?
So humor, I actually asked ChatGPT to write a joke for me the other day, and but again, as Chris pointed out, my prompt was pretty basic. But what I think is really interesting is a lot of these companies are hiring folks from the different creative fields. I heard a story recently that one of the AI companies, I don't know if it was OpenAI, so I don't want to misspeak, but they hired poets because if I put in a prompt, I would love a sonnet, a Shakespearean sonnet about my day here in Boston. They need it. You still need human moderation and human training to kind of say, okay, that's not really a Shakespearean sonnet. That sounds more like William Blake, and so or it sounds like it's a greeting card, so you need to improve it. So I think we'll closely get to a point in the next 3 to 5 years where it'll be much more possible to approach the dimensionality of human expression on this front.
Agree.
And then I think we have time for one more question. And this question was, thinking idealistically, what regulations should be put into place that will best protect and benefit humanity equitably? It's a lot to answer in 3 minutes.
Big one.
Great question.
I think I'll take this first this time. Rather than thinking about it in terms of regulation, it would something that I've been really talking to journalists about is not trying to think about where else they can do their best work and where are the areas that we can kind of spread our focus. So rather than taking fundings and all these initiatives and grants from these tech companies, where other areas that journalists can use for investigative purposes to do huge, data analyses and investigative journalism. Actually, places like where we are, academic institutions are great places that journalists can actually partner with and have a slightly less profit-centered perspectives, and they're just trying to be in an educational setting. They can actually benefit in those kind of partnerships. So I think it's an interesting place to really push on working with research and nonprofit organizations to further works around investigative journalism, really interrogate these systems where they can with with what, and not really lean too much on getting all the fundings from these big organizations who are the ones developing these technologies as well.
Oh, great. Well, we are just about at time. Does anybody have any, we have 2 minutes if anybody has any parting remarks that they'd like to make.
Just really quickly, I would say that, as much as you can be familiar with these tools, use them as much as you can it's a level of competency that I think for the 4th industrial revolution that we are barreling towards. It's just really important to feel comfortable using these various tools, even if you don't want to use them in your daily life. Know they're out there, know they exist, and know they're impacting you, whether you use them or not.
Great.
I would just say, if you are a creative professional out there, it's just don't get complacent. If we're all putting in the same obvious questions, the outputs aren't going to be very differentiating. Use it as a co-collaborator, put rigor into the upfront ideation. It can definitely speed the development process, but I still recommend, sketching and taking notes and going outside and experiencing, what humans do. So then you can put better ideas in and you're not as dependent on it for the ideas. It's more about developing and expanding on.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. This is Sejin, Chris, Margaret. This has really been wonderful. And I really appreciate you being here and taking time out of your very busy days, especially at the end of the semester. So thank you so much. And to those of you who are watching, this will be on the COM website as well as our YouTube channel. So be sure to watch it and to share it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.